Thank you for watching this third episode of Through My Eyes, a survivor's journey through domestic abuse, brought to you by Needham's Domestic Violence Action Committee, also known as DVAC. I'm Sydney Carter, and I'm the host for this series, and also a member of Needham's DVAC. Joining us today is Victoria Denneno, a community outreach officer at the Needham Police Department and a member of Needham's DVAC. We also have Pam Jordan, the Director of Community Advocacy from Reach Beyond Domestic Violence. And we have returning from our second episode, Brittney, who is here to continue sharing her journey as a DV survivor. Brittney is working with Reach through their Survivor Speakers Bureau. Thank you all for participating in today's episode. In our first episode, we defined domestic violence as a pattern of behaviors that one person uses to gain and maintain power and control over another person. And in our second episode, we talked about how trauma and domestic violence overlap. We are here today to talk about how a domestic violence survivor may interact with local police and their experience, and what their experience might be in the court system. Brittney, your journey began in another state, but for the purpose of the local viewers, can you share with us your experience in the Massachusetts court systems?
Sure. So my case originally started in the state of Tennessee, and there was an active divorce and child custody case going on. And unfortunately, the post-separation abuse became so bad with stalking and just verbal harassment. I ended up fleeing back to Massachusetts for safety. And as soon as I came home to Massachusetts, I decided to file a restraining order against him to protect my son and I. I was just terrified that he would eventually come here. So I needed to do that in order to protect us, at least have some sort of paper trail. And it was granted, which was great. I just went into the court, filled out an affidavit with everything that had happened up until that date. And I ended up having a hearing that day in front of a judge, and she believed me, which was amazing, and I was granted that.
And just for clarification purposes, a restraining order, order of protection, and 209A order are all synonyms in this state.
Thank you for your clarification. Brittney, why do you recall this experience?
It really, during the last 4.5 years, that judge believed me, and I didn't have to go the extra mile for her for me to convince her as to what was happening to me and my son. And so that just sticks out as one of the only positive experiences that I had during this whole situation.
Thank you for sharing. I'm curious, why did you decide to seek services?
I decided to seek services because I realized that this wasn't a battle that I could take on by myself. My son was 18 months old at the time, and I was working full time, and I just needed more help figuring out how to navigate the court system. So I ended up reaching out to Reach for help.
And how did things change for you when you got connected to Reach?
They changed a lot. I was provided with a lot of information, and I was given an advocate, which is Pam, who's here today. And she ended up coming to a lot of my court hearings with me, so I didn't feel so alone. And it just really felt like I had somebody to confide in that was on my side. Reach also provided me with a support group that I was reluctant to join at first, just because I didn't feel that it was something for me. I ended up joining it, and it was really difficult in the beginning to share my experience with a group of people, but it ended up being the safest place for me to open up, because women in that group have had similar situations, and we were able to learn from each other and just be there for each other. So that has been tremendous in my life, and it's I've been part of that for the last 4.5 years.
Thank you. So I know that we've talked about that your experience takes place in Tennessee. So we won't talk too much about the police down there, but I'm curious, Officer Denneno, can you describe what happens when someone calls 911 about a domestic violence situation?
Yeah, definitely. First, I want to say, Brittney, I'm so sorry for the interactions you had with the courts and your situation. But so if somebody calls 911 in Massachusetts or in Needham, what's going to happen is dispatch will take the call and they'll try to get information from the caller. Oftentimes with domestic violence, you don't get a lot. You get a lot of background noise, so it's in our policy that we'll send 2 officers and a supervisor. They will go to the scene and separate the 2 parties, interview them, and try to figure out what happened. If there's evidence at the scene, like injuries or things are in disarray, they will take pictures of that and note it as part of their investigation, and they'll interview any witnesses. So typically the 2 witnesses are the 2 partners. But they'll do that, and then in Massachusetts, sometimes arrests are mandatory, sometimes they're preferred. So we have pretty much no discretion when it comes to domestic violence. So we will arrest the abuser. If it's during court hours, they'll be brought right to court for arraignment. And if it's after court hours, they will be non-bailable for 6 hours. It's the cooling off period. So from there, they can be bailed after the 6 hours and then go to court the next morning. Officers on scene will help out and get the survivor medical aid. They'll document any of the wounds and stuff like that, and then also help them with a restraining order if they want one. We try to just empower and encourage people. We can't make the decision for people whether or not to get a restraining order, but we just try to empower them. We give back the power and control that they were missing in those relationships, so it's up to them. But we will give them a ride to court, fill it out with them, help them in any way we can. Not fill it out with them, but just sit with them. They have to do all the filling out, but we will just sit with them and go from there. So if it's during court hours, again, we'll bring them right to court, but if it's after hours, we'll help them out with an emergency restraining order. When we're helping out with the restraining orders, the emergency restraining orders are only good until the next business day. So if this happens on a Friday, they're good until Monday. If it happens on a Tuesday, good until Wednesday. Obviously, holidays and stuff like that impact it. So that being said, it's important that the survivor goes to court the next day and renews the restraining order if that's what they would like to do. And then there's different ones. So there's a 10-day restraining order that gives 10 days where it allows, at the end of it, the survivor and the abuser to basically be in court and each state their case. If the judge grants that, they have a 1 year, a 5 year, and in some certain cases, they'll have a lifetime restraining order. But typically, the survivor has to go back every year to continue with that. It is a civil order, so if the abuser violates it, then it becomes a criminal situation, and that is a non-negotiable, no discretion. If somebody violates that, the police are going, they are locking them up.
And court can definitely be stressful for survivors, having to face their abuser multiple times. And at that 10-day hearing is the first time that they're facing them after, the incident happened. So it's always helpful to, be able to utilize either the victim witness advocate that's in the court system, or if they're able to get in contact with a domestic violence agency such as REACH prior to that 10-day hearing, an advocate can accompany them to court for emotional support and just to be there to help navigate that process.
Officer Denneno, can you tell us a little bit more about your specific role and any special trainings that you might have gone through?
Yep, so I'm the community outreach officer, meaning that the only things I really focus on are domestic violence, mental health, and substance use. I'm very lucky in the sense that I get to do that full time. At the department that I previously worked at, I was balancing full-time patrol with being a part-time domestic violence officer. There's just not enough hours in the day. So I really am lucky that I get to focus on this stuff, but I wouldn't be anything without the community partners that I get to work with. So my partner at work, she's a clinician, And that's been super beneficial, not only for mental health calls, obviously, but for, for anything, for domestic violence calls as well, because people are more comfortable talking to a clinician versus a police officer. Reach, they help us out a lot. I will refer to you guys. I carry your pamphlets, things like that. So basically what I do is I go around after the incident. If an incident happens while I'm working, I'll go out. But typically I go up as a follow-up basis. So domestics are tricky because you don't want to just show up, because they are the most dangerous calls for law enforcement. So it's important not to just show up there. But I'm creative in the ways that I reach out to people. Patrol will do this too, but I also provide them with the Massachusetts abuse law, a pamphlet for Reach, and then my business card, just so that they can reach out whenever they need to. I come in an unmarked cruiser, plain clothes, so that stigma and shame that people may feel, we really do try to reduce it just by doing this. I definitely do not wear a full uniform every day. And as far as training goes for my role, I obviously went to the police academy for 7 months. The academies are good. They are training officers in domestic violence calls. Officer safety is, basically number one in these scenarios, from the way that we learn, just because you can't help people if you're not safe yourself. So there's a lot of that, because like I said, they're the most dangerous calls for us. But we are learning, stuff about trauma-informed policing. I've been doing this for 7 years. Being the DV officer in my previous department helped, and I worked very closely with the DV advocacy down there. In addition to that, I can pretty much take classes when I want. So I've gone to a couple advanced domestic violence courses. I've taken courses on DV in my master's program. So I'm just always kind of trying to learn and figure out different ways to help people.
Brittney, as you were going through the court process and then you got connected to Reach, I'm curious, what are some ways that an advocate was helpful for you?
It was extremely helpful. My advocate was there for me every time I had a question. Unfortunately, my attorneys, they have so much going on that they're not taking, or I felt as though they weren't taking a deep enough dive into my case. So it was really helpful to have an advocate for the questions that I didn't understand, or if I needed to go over something before signing something. And that was really helpful to have somebody else that understands the court process, has seen orders like this or similar documents. So that was helpful.
Thanks. Pam, can you talk a little bit more about advocacy at Reach?
Sure. I'm the director of the Community Advocacy team, and I have a team of 5 community advocates who speak various languages. We have 3 that speak Spanish, 1 that speaks Haitian Creole, another one that speaks 5 different African languages, and then we utilize the language line for any other languages that we don't have an advocate that is fluent in. And we get our referrals from a variety of places. Oftentimes it's the police department that are referring, especially for these high-risk cases. A lot of times we'll get calls immediately, and those are the ones that we try and prioritize and get in touch with same day. There's been times where we've actually gone over to the court while they're there to try and make that connection. We get other referrals from the victim witness advocate at the court, who is someone that when you initially go in for a restraining order, they can be there if someone goes in alone to support them through like the paperwork process and how to write their affidavit, and then stand with them before the judge when they're petitioning the court, which is really helpful to have someone standing beside you. So a lot of times we get the referrals from them. Sometimes it could be the Department of Children and Families, therapists, school systems, and sometimes it's just survivors that are reaching out on their own because they're ready to, to kind of address, the issue and to seek services. So from there, they're assigned an advocate after they complete an intake with our intake coordinator, and that advocate will meet with them, and we really take the approach where we're meeting them where they're at. They are the expert in their own life, and we will, meet with them a lot of the times it's, initially safety planning, trying to figure out, what they need help with. Is it housing? Is it, a follow-up court date? Do they need to try and apply for some type of benefits? So the advocate works hand in hand with them on kind of like sorting out their case, prioritizing what needs to be done, and then doing those referrals. We also offer support groups at REACH where the advocates often are co-facilitating those, and they range anywhere from what we refer to as DV 101, where you're kind of learning the basics about power and control and healthy relationships, red flags and trauma. And then we kind of graduate up and do some groups that are more focused on the self and, kind of moving forward. And we have our Survivor Speakers Bureau for survivors that are ready to share their story and get out into the communities and to bring awareness to domestic violence. And, Brittney has done all of those groups, and she is now in our Survivor Speakers Bureau. So we're there basically to help, navigate, which can be an often, chaotic time for survivors, and to kind of bring a sense of calm to them and to help them kind of take those steps to move forward. REACH services are free. They're available to anyone. So survivors, no matter what stage they're at, we often work with survivors who are still with the abuser. We work with survivors who, have recently left, and sometimes survivors aren't reaching out until, many years, oftentimes after they're out of it, when they're finally ready to kind of work through it. And we also have a shelter that can house 8 families and that are fleeing domestic violence, and they also get similar services with an advocate at the shelter to help them navigate their situation and to find permanent housing. REACH also has a hotline that operates 24/7, and it's not only to support survivors that are, seeking shelter or seeking services, but it also provides, a line of communication for friends or family that may be wanting to help, someone that's going through domestic violence, but they're not sure how to navigate that. So the advocates are all trained that are answering the hotline in being able to respond to those and offer that support. REACH does cover 27 cities and towns, and Needham is one of the communities that we serve. So anyone that lives, works, goes to school, or has a connection to the Needham community can receive services through REACH.
So thank you, Pam, for sharing a little bit more about the advocacy program over at REACH. Brittney, I'm a little curious about what other support systems that you had when you were going through this experience and even now after.
I have already mentioned the support group, which was extremely helpful during that time. I also have a phenomenal family that was there for me every step of the way. And I do have some really great friends that were also there to be a listening ear when I needed it. Unfortunately, domestic violence doesn't just affect one person. It affects your entire family, your friend, your support system, which trickles into your community.
I think absolutely right that domestic violence affects our whole communities, right? Oftentimes folks have this perception that domestic violence is a privacy matter and only impacts one person. But if somebody's experiencing domestic violence, they're not able to be the friend that they once were, or offer that to support to folks. Mm-hmm. They're not able to access their family and friends as easily. And even thinking about folks that are going to work every day, sometimes it can be really hard to finish common tasks because we're having this constant worrying all the time. Brittney, I'm so glad that you have the support that you deserve. Thank you, Brittney, Pam, Officer Denneno, for joining us today. I hope our audience will join us for our next episode of Through My Eyes, a survivor's journey through domestic abuse, where we'll have a discussion that will center around healthy relationships.